All right, so good evening. This is the Planning and Development Committee meeting. We are calling this meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. So in attendance, we have Ms. Carla Grant, Elizabeth Jones, Justin Booth, and City Manager Scott Frank. Tonight on the agenda, we're going to talk about tiny homes and then also brick sidewalk preservation. So I guess just to kick it off, tiny homes. And so if you guys remember, this came up a couple of months ago. I believe somebody had approached the city about a permit or what would be required to put in a tiny home. And we actually asked the Planning Commission to look into this. And so they've come forward with some recommendations for us. And so some of what they're saying is, neighboring communities have taken the approach of not allowing these units because they're too hard to enforce certain codes on. However, the Planning Commission is recommending that we do set forth some guidelines to allow tiny homes in our community that might be enticing to tourism and future development for that. So at a high level, what the Planning Commission is recommending is allowing them to be included in the list of accessory structures provided in City Code, Chapter 27040105, defining definitions of tiny homes, which we have here, and allowing for tiny homes that meet the requirements to be either an allowed accessory structure, which will be one per city lot, or allowing freestanding within a certain zone in the city limits. So, which we would have to define, like an area that we thought maybe is more appropriate for these types of structures for that. And any exceptions to this would then need to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals if somebody wanted to put those things forward. They also have recommended that tiny homes should be registered with the city with a fee in line with the annual cost of administering to make sure that they stay up to code in the city. So some of the things that they recommended is that tiny homes, for definitions, that a tiny home or tiny house would be a structure anywhere from 400 square feet, not to exceed 1,000 square feet. That tiny homes would be allowed in designated areas as determined by the Board of Zoning. A tiny home on wheels would be considered a camping unit and therefore would only be permitted in a designated campground, which is what's in city code currently, like, an RV, it would be basically considered an RV. And for general standards, all tiny houses should comply with the following. So again, these are the Planning Commission's recommendations. That each tiny house shall be located on its own individual lot, except when established as an accessory dwelling unit. Construction of the house shall comply with any applicable building code. That each house shall be installed on a permanent foundation with wheels and chassis removed if that's how it is built. And you'll see that sometimes, like if you ever watch the HGTV shows, where they build tiny homes, that a lot of times they build them on wheels and a chassis, in order to move them, but that would have to be removed. That each house would be connected to water, sewer, electric, etc. Minimum ceiling heights. Common areas must have a minimum ceiling height of at least 6 feet 8 inches, and bathrooms must have a minimum of 6 feet 4 inches. Windows, they're not recommending any number of windows required. However, the structure would need to meet the standard requirement for emergency exit points, which I believe we already have in city code, don't we, Scott?
I believe so, yes. Should be in the egress, so for them, if they have a window, that would be the second.
Yeah. Plumbing, at least one separate internal bathroom would be required, and so they'd be considered a tiny home. And stairs, they would need to have stairs or ladders to reach loft areas. They also recommend for porches that a tiny home permitted as a principal use shall have a porch. So if this was not an accessory dwelling unit, if they're putting it on a lot as a standalone property, it would be required to have a porch. Which is oriented towards the common open space or a public or approved private street street be a minimum width of 4 feet or 75% of the building facade width. And a minimum depth of 5 feet for a porch for that. So I think this gives us a really good base to start with. I guess let me ask, what do you guys think about? I agree that like if we allow them on existing lots with existing homes, that it would be an accessory dwelling unit and only one of those is like permitted, I think, according to code right now.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Or maybe, because that would also like a garage is a accessory unit. I think the thing that we were concerned about when we talked about this before was somebody putting like 2 or 3 of these things in their backyard in order to generate maybe potential income as, you know, weekend rental units, and we don't want that.
Correct. I agree with that. So the accessory dwelling units, do they have to be hooked up to power, water, plumbing, all that stuff as well?
Currently,
Well, as proposed.
as proposed, the tiny house accessory dwelling unit would have to be hooked up to electric, water, sewer.
Okay.
Currently in code, I don't think there is anything, like if you have a garage, whatever, that you have to have power to it, or if you have a shed that you have to have
An
power to
outbuilding
it.
or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so this would be like a different from that.
So what's the thought behind having the accessory dwelling units on the existing lots with existing houses?
Well, I think what they're saying is that they, it's on its own individual lot, except when it's established as an accessory dwelling unit on
Right.
an existing property.
Right, that's the part that I'm,
So I think they're
Right,
just
concerned about.
saying that if I own a home in town and again, this would also would have to go with code, like you have to have so much space, right, between your property line and the
Mhm.
next thing in order to put something on it anyway. But if you're going to, do it, that it's just be limited to one.
It depends on how big of
Well,
area you
I
have.
think
though,
so. I was hoping
mean,
Becky was gonna be here, but, I think that the way that this city code currently reads, let me pull it up. That, yeah, I know, it's back. I don't know for how long.
Well, no, I looked a month or so
Uh,
ago and you couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, it's, it is back at least temporarily. So, let me look how fast if it pulls up, you know, how the Wi-Fi is.
so on the definitions,
Mhm.
so I know 1,000 square feet is not a huge house, but it's not, I'll bet there's already houses in town that are 1,000.
I would agree, like, we have a lot of smaller homes in
Mhm,
town.
Right, are
So-
those now tiny homes?
So I think the thing that we have to remember, these are their recommendations, these are not,
Sure.
like,
Or could you just word it, new construction going forward?
There you go.
yeah,
Okay. I just don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
I know,
Um,
Caleb's house is 1,000 square feet. So
For some small little house, man, come
It
I know.
is,
on. You monster.
yes.
here we go, 250406.
There won't be any big parties down there.
Right.
So currently in code, like tiny print,
Huh, tiny houses.
tiny
great.
houses, tiny print.
Few people watching out there must be entertained by my banter.
Currently, it states that accessory structures.
Yeah.
So currently in code, it says, when it talks about accessory structures, it says that they're not used for human habitation, so this would be changing that. That they shall be constructed of flood-resistant materials, that they shall be constructed and placed on the lot to offer them minimum resistance, this is about floodwaters, that they shall have service facilities such as electric and heating equipment elevated or flood-proofed, blah, blah, blah. So currently it says that accessory structures containing no more than 600 square feet
Personal garage.
Yeah, I don't know that this is like necessarily a garage, so this is talking about for flooding. Let me look for it.
So that would kind of limit where they can go to because of the flooding, right?
Well, I think that's true, Scott, right now, anyway, if you are trying to build something new.
So if you,
And the
anywhere you go in the floodplain, as long as you meet the elevation requirements and the, electrical, I mean, there's requirements for that. So like when I did mine, I had to raise it up because I'm in the floodplain. Now, if I was in the floodway, you can't do anything without a hydraulic study. The floodway is proposed to change and go over the tracks right around where Watkins Street goes over the tracks to the old park. And then if it goes through, it'll run down, Patton Street, cut through the trailer park, and then actually cut through part of the old Rocky warehouse a little bit, and pretty much cut back through to the river behind Victoria Village back there. So everything in that area to change going forward is going to present a serious challenge to those folks.
I wonder if the Peden Stadium would get caught up in that new floodway.
It probably won't. The river takes a 90-degree turn down there.
Funny how that
Where,
works.
where do we stand on all that?
I will tell you that I got a tentative map from Athens that they got from the EPA. I got it a month ago at the most. And the version that they shared with Athens has our proposed lines on it, which is Doyle. Mr. Doyle did for us that Gary Hunter hired. So it still shows the floodplain on, the flood way on this side of the tracks, except for where I just shared with you guys. So essentially, if you see on the map, you got the river here. It does this hard dog leg.
Yep.
Basically, it goes. If you take it from there, run it to here, this side will be floodway, which is all of this.
But that's what it is currently, right?
No, right now the floodway goes through my backyard. So the floodway comes down here and actually goes across right here. So it's significantly smaller.
Okay. Alright, so currently in code, in the zoning part, chapter 27, accessory buildings, accessory structures, when not attached to a principal structure, may be located at any location with a rear or side yard, provided, however, that an unattached structure may not be located in a required side setback between a permanent structure and the property line, or in an area that would place it too close to the street, that would place it closer to the street than a principal structure. Accessory buildings can only be placed on a lot with a principal structure. That's what it says for that part, and then, okay, then here, accessory structures must be located more than 5 feet from any property line, may not be located within a required front yard. Detached accessory structures may not occupy more than 5% of the lot.
Okay, love that out right off the
Well,
top.
yeah, so these are things that, I'm just saying, this is like what's in the code right now. So just so we like understand.
But we could amend that.
Yeah,
right?
we would have to amend this.
One question I just got popped in through a text was, will these be allowed to be rental units?
And that's where I was headed with that as well.
Yeah,
I mean, what's the end game on these accessory dwelling units? Is it so everybody with a yard in town can put up a rental?
well, I think that's something that we have to talk about, right? Like, and I think that goes to the idea that they have to have electric, plumbing, that they have to meet certain codes. And I think that we've talked about this before too, right? About, if we should have like standard building codes, and then if with that, then, we need to make sure probably that they're required to have, smoke detectors and, be made with, built with like fire resistant materials, that it's not just some ramshackle,
The term I've heard is the new trailer, because we've gotten trailers out of the city for the most part, you can't bring them unless they're newer to a designated area. And, does this create the new trailer?
Well, and I think that was our concern and why we want to talk about like what would be acceptable, because we don't want something to happen like we've seen in other communities where somebody comes in and buys a lot and puts 6 or 8 little buildings on them, and if you will,
We were
almost
just
like
talking
storage
about that.
sheds, they're almost like storage sheds that they,
Yep.
maybe insulate and, put a sink in and say that it's a rental property. Like, we don't want that,
That's my concern with this.
right?
Like my property, my bottom,
Yeah.
I could put 20 of those stupid things in that look terrible coming up the hill.
Absolutely.
So
Which is,
I don't have a problem with tiny homes per se. I think on a lot as the main habitation on the
Mhm.
lot, I'm fine with that. I don't know about this whole accessory dwelling structure.
well, I think that's what we have to consider, right? Do we want to allow somebody who owns a home? And I think the question would be, how many properties in town really have enough space?
Well, you'll have to be 5 feet from the property line.
Yeah, but it can only take up 5 or 10% of your yard, according to existing code. So even if you have,
Probably not right in town,
Yeah.
but getting towards the outskirts, there would probably be
yeah,
a little bit more.
Yeah, the new trailer, that's
And I
an
guess
interesting
for
thought.
on the same lot, like maybe parents let their children, put one there.
mhm. Or in some communities, like, I know like in California or when we lived in Nevada, like a lot of times they call these things like granny cottages too. So they put them in for,
Mother-in-law.
for a mother-in-law, yeah, like, to come and live or stay part-time. For that. But I agree, we don't want them to just be
Cheap rental structure.
like cheap rental structures. That people are renting out on weekends or, yeah,
So should it just be if you want to actually move and make your home here and not just a bunch of rentals,
That's my thought.
so you're saying like a primary
residents?
on a, not on an existing lot with an existing home,
Right.
it's on maybe an empty lot,
Yeah, so say if you got one of those where the land bank is came and,
and they're gonna
the house
demolish
is
a
torn
house.
down, yeah, you want to put a
Yeah.
tiny one, God bless.
Because I don't think currently we have any kind of square footage requirements for a home being built in code right now. I don't think there's any like minimum square footage. There's setback requirements, right? There's, you have to be set back so far from the street and from the property line and all that. But there's no, like, we don't have anything in code right now that says, on a lot this size, a typical size lot, you have to build at least a 1,200 square foot home. We don't have anything like that right now.
A lot of our lots, so back to your point earlier, that the existing code will, most of our lots in town are 50 by 120 or 50 by
Mhm.
125. So that puts it at a max 600 square feet of any of these, which is on the much smaller side.
Mhm.
So as you mentioned earlier, that will eliminate a lot of that. I don't even know if this is a code anywhere else, but is it one of those that we set a cap? You can only have 20 in the city and the locations must be pre-approved by council, or, and if it goes well, then you can expand that ceiling, but, and that way they're all registered, kind of like their rentals are registered.
So the cap idea is interesting. Council part, I think that could open you up into favoritism, just they approve theirs, but not mine,
Yeah,
Then to me, it's a zoning board issue. And that's something that I want to talk about in one meeting, a judiciary meeting, about changing how the zoning board is set up. Currently, it's a separate structure from planning commission. I would like to see us maybe change that and make the zoning board like any 3 members of planning commission. Because right now we're having a hard time getting people to serve in these things. And if we change that, then we would always have
Make planning zoning.
A
like
zoning board.
Like a
It's-
subcommission
yeah.
of the planning.
And it could be any, like, and at any given time, like for any event, it could be any 3 members, so
Oh,
it's not always the same, you know, members. I don't know, that just seems to make sense to
It's
me
interesting.
for that, but, I think this then, hopefully it takes us back down the road that we talked about when I first got on council, when we were talking about the International Building Code and establishing, do you remember that conversation? This was about a
Vaguely.
year ago, it was probably over a year ago,
Mhm.
that we talked about adopting, International Building Code in the city, which would make, you know, you would then have like a set of standards that people have to follow when they're building, or even remodeling
Mhm.
at
We
that
need
point.
steps, because right now we have a lot, I mean, I even have steep steps at my house and it's
Mhm.
new, you know, there's rules for that, rules for egress, as you mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, the type of materials required and, um, I think the IBC would be a great addition. The only issue we would have, but that's a different issue, is just enforcing it.
Right, and is that where we got hung up? Because I felt like we talked about this and we were ready to come forward with it, but then it just,
Yeah, I think enforcement was a big
When-
issue. That takes
Did
manpower.
he get money together with, doing rental inspections as well? For some reason, I'm thinking it got
No.
muddied up with
I
that.
feel like it just got
Quite
like,
possible.
we got sidetracked with it because there was
And
some
you just
kind
wanna
of
be
issue.
careful not to deter people. from the town.
No,
Sure.
but I think part of this though actually makes town more enticing for a lot of people. When you know, if you're gonna come in here and spend money to build an, you know, to
Nobody's
build
gonna build an
something,
igloo beside
that
you.
nobody's gonna build, you know, something substandard potentially next to you.
I mean, it kind of just, you know, goes both ways. You want people to come build, but you don't wanna make it so hard that they don't wanna come.
I think that most surrounding communities have these standards though in place. So I don't think that we would be like creating like an unnecessary roadblock for people to do it. I think the issue is who
We just want to enforce it.
enforces it. And I think maybe that's where we got caught up the last time is we have one, code officer, and does she have the capability to, be processing building permits and doing site inspections and, not only the physical capability, like with all the other things she does,
We should train
Does
for it.
this, is she trained for it? Does she have the skill set to go out and be able to say, oh, you know, this is supposed to be, you know, the pitch is supposed to be this, but it's this. I don't know.
I mean, she's definitely got the skill set, but the bandwidth, I would say, is not there.
Yeah.
Because I mean, she could be doing more regular code stuff now. She just has so much on her plate, you know, to go out there and put even more. It's give and take, you know, where do we, she finds the balance in between, probably about 3 different things between code, answering the phone, and then different, Mickey Mouse or science projects that come up into the city hall as well, so.
But right now, if I wanted to come to town and build a new house on an empty lot, like to say I buy a lot from the land bank and tear something down and want to build something. There's no process right now, is there, where I have to get building permits?
I built my house here, and the only thing I needed was
Yeah.
a flood permit and zoning permit.
Yeah,
That's not through the city.
Well, they were both through the city.
Oh, wait, okay.
Basically, I'm building a residential structure in the residential area, and then, the flood is anywhere within the floodplain.
They didn't have to conform to any building codes or anything else.
No, I mean, I could have done any kind of electrical, I could have done anything I wanted for the most part. I mean, I could have put bunk beds in the garage and.
Did it.
yeah. But I think that's right, and I think that you had to do those things because you were building in the flood
Plain.
plain.
Mhm.
But if I'm building up on, I don't know, High Street, you know, High Street, and that's not the floodplain or the floodway, I technically wouldn't have to get,
Correct.
and it's already in the city, it's already in a residential zone area. I wouldn't have to get any kind of permit right now.
Correct. The only people required to get permits other than flood zone or floodplain is commercial structures, and
Right.
they're all inspected through the state and county.
Yeah, so within any of our residential things right now, I think that's something else that we have to really consider. I agree with you, Carla, we don't want to make it cumbersome and uninviting, but at the same time, you want to have some kind of standards.
So find that happy
Yeah.
medium.
Well, I think we want to find standards because like we already know that Becky, when she goes out and does certain inspections or just goes and sees things, that we know that we have structures in town that aren't up to standards really to be people to be living in. And we don't want somebody to come and build something new that's already, has,
People would send their kids to school and go to a rental, it might be some standard, some
Yeah.
standard wiring or ventilation or whatever it is, something may not be safe.
Mold.
Figure out.
right, and make sure that they're hooking up to the, sewer correctly and that they're, that they're putting in, I mean, I know some people are gonna be like, why is this any of your business? But that, you're putting in grounded outlets in bathrooms and putting in, appropriate electrical for your house and the right size,
Bigger box.
breaker box,
Yeah, not looking to regulate, 2 inches on your grass out front. We just want to make sure your house isn't going to burn down because the builder did a crappy job,
right,
used substandard materials or didn't know what they were doing.
And then who would enforce that?
Well,
well,
that's,
that's,
yeah.
that's what, then we're back to where we
$64
were,
question.
right?
Back to the
And
tiny
so-
homes then.
Yeah, back to tiny, yeah,
Carlos like, darn, I thought we were done with that.
yeah. I think,
And if I
So when
may,
it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
another potential threat of these tiny homes in the floodplain. So theoretically speaking, they can take one of those and shove poles underneath of it and it be up in the air because that's acceptable. So, for example, if you wanted to put,
Oh, as an accessory.
just like they do at the beach, at the beach, they have.
Yeah,
that
how
along
they
the-
put on stilts.
Yeah, with stilts.
The Ohio River, yeah.
You can do the exact same thing here. So, I mean, you do it with the house as well. I just, with those bigger homes, it kind of makes sense because you can enclose it so it looks like a garage, but on a tiny home, what does that look like? Because it's not habitable. You can't have anything down there. You're gonna have breakaway walls and all this other stuff. But what does that look like in the city? So, something to think about as well.
it is.
And where it says determined by the Board of Zoning, so does that mean that whatever they decided, that council would just have to go with it even if they disagreed as to some of the
Where
places?
are,
It's under B, I think it is, determined by the Board of Zoning.
well, I think in the letter, they say that council needs to decide what that is, and then it becomes a decision of the zoning board when somebody comes forward and says, I want to put it here, and then the zoning board would look at
After
like
we've
what,
set the
after we
parameters.
set what the
Okay,
parameters
okay.
were. Yeah.
That's better.
And I guess that also, is another question, right? Like, are there areas you say it's okay and maybe yes, but that's not in the floodway or the floodplain area, right? Like,
Well, I mean, floodway and floodplain, we can just exclude those by
yeah,
zone.
right, yeah.
Say, okay, anything south of this, sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah, because didn't they say they wanted it on a permanent foundation,
Yes.
which you couldn't have very well if it was on poles?
Right.
Well, but what's,
But is that the-
what's argued, or
Yeah.
what's a permanent foundation? Because you could argue that those big houses at the beach on stilts are on a permanent foundation.
Mhm.
Kind of gets into another term that we've learned a lot about that is very ambiguous.
What, oh,
I would consider it
what's
on a
permanent?
concrete, brick
Right,
foundation
Right.
under it, almost like a half a basement or, brick.
Right.
Okay, I think we need to maybe try to do a little more research, talk to our code officer, Becky, and get, some enforcement thoughts on this as well.
and I'll have to double check, because you asked me earlier that, as far as the code goes and the one exit and everything else, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but, campers, they don't have 2 doors, but they have egress windows and such that they can get out. So if people are gonna live in these full time, then are they required to have two means of egress, two doors versus one door and windows? And I don't know the answer. I mean, I told Harry there was no need for him to be here tonight, but we can get back to you on that, I'm sure.
But Scott, let me ask you this, when you built your place, like, did you have to have egress windows in like all the bedrooms?
Nothing,
Nothing,
not a single inspection from anybody.
Okay.
The only thing I had to do was comply with the elevation.
so that was
That's
it.
surprising.
Well, I think it's because we don't have any building code in town, and I think that's a whole other issue, right? Like,
Right.
bedrooms should have an egress window for escape purposes, like in case of a fire. I think our fire chief would probably agree with that.
Decks is another big one because you know, a lot of times, you know, your backyard or your weekend warrior will go build a deck and it's not made for the weight and they collapse.
Mhm.
And it's a bigger, I mean, it just doesn't make the news, but it's a bigger problem because they don't put enough strength into them. Where if we had an inspection program, we can make sure that that didn't happen.
Yeah, and unfortunately, those things don't come up usually until there's some kind of tragedy
Yes.
where it's collapsed because of weight. Like, you know, you've seen these, you do see these things on the news, right? Where like somebody's having a party or even a restaurant, you know, they have too many people on it and it wasn't built to hold, you know, 200 people and they have that many people out there.
I think it's definitely a goal we always have for ourselves to get that in place.
I think so too. I mean, I think some kind of building code ultimately is needed.
Could you imagine how tacky it'd be if I built my house on Columbus Street?
Yeah.
It would look awful there. So, I mean, I think that's the stuff, and maybe that's exactly what you're saying. I'm not trying to mansplain, just that, you know, if you live on Fayette or Columbus, you know, you need to have a stick-built house where if it's out of the main view, like up in a hollow, you know, off of Harbor Street or something, then maybe a tiny house isn't a big deal.
Mhm.
But I think a tiny house, even on Franklin Street, you know, would probably look pretty far out of place.
Yeah, where you think you know, you somehow unfortunately lose one of the big, like grand Victorian homes in town. You don't necessarily want somebody then to come in and build a 400 square foot,
Or maybe they
like accessory structure to live in.
buy it, you know, an abandoned property which has a house that hasn't been touched in 5 years and say, well, I'm not gonna mess with that. I'll shove a tiny house in the backyard.
I
So
think,
we might have to set areas then.
Yeah.
where we want-
but I think that brings up a whole other issue, right? Like I buy a dilapidated property. This is falling in. I don't deal with that and then I put
My rental
a
tiny home in the
a
backyard.
tiny rental home in the backyard.
Yeah.
Luckily, you guys passed that abandoned building, so
and-
that'll get them a little bit, but they'll still be there as a problem.
Mhm. Okay, all right. I think we need to talk to Chief Barber, and then Becky about some of this and
And we talk
reconvene.
to them about what would be a good area. I mean, who,
I think that we just need to, Becky probably, about like where that would
Well,
be appropriate.
I don't know the right answer off the top of my head, but I do know wherever you put those, it kind of goes back to your original point with people moving from out of town. You know, would you want to buy a house, a really nice Victorian house and fix it up, knowing that there's an opportunity for a tiny house being right beside you? You know, because that'll automatically, in theory, that would automatically kill your property value if that was there. So, you know, it'd almost be like its own zoning area. So, you know, if you have residential, again, I mean, even on my side of the tracks, it'd probably be okay until the floodway moves, but you know, over there, there's not a theme, if you will. Down there, we just, you know, have a couple old houses, trailer mine, you know.
I do want to say, I mean, like, there are some really nice tiny homes that get built, right? They're not all, and I think a way a lot of people want to live right now is with less,
Yeah,
you know,
minimalist.
like, you know, we all don't need, you know, 4,000 square foot homes or this. So I'm not like I think we want to be careful, like, we're not disparaging the idea of a tiny home. We just want to make sure that it matches the character of the neighborhoods where they go. And that also, we're not creating a situation where somebody can come in and put multiple in a yard and fill up their backyard with basically what becomes like weekend rental units for
Right.
them.
Kind of
to
like
make-
Scott said, they need to
Yes.
fit in
Yes.
to
Yep.
the.
Yeah, so we need to do that. Okay, then, so we'll do a little more research on this. So the other thing we talked about and, or wanted to talk about was the brick sidewalk preservation, and I think, Mr. Frank brought up a good point is, we want to maintain the character of our town and what, kind of what Nelsonville is known for, right? Nelsonville blocks, Star brick, we have a lot of these bricks in our community on the sidewalks that when people are going to replace sidewalks, we need to understand more that like, if a homeowner is going to replace a sidewalk, is there any kind of like requirement that they have to do it in a way that meets like ADA compliance, or any of that? But I think that the big thing we want to make sure is that, is seeing that these bricks be preserved. So if we can't require a homeowner to like replace brick and put the brick back, for whatever reason. And I know that we have this issue, right? Because we have big old trees that are growing up and the tree trunks get underneath there and they push them and the sidewalks get all wonky. That we be able to, claim those bricks, so that the city could use them somewhere else. Whether that's, in a public green space, potentially, or something. I just hate to see that these bricks that have been in our community for, 100 years or longer are being, dug up, sold, or just
If
destroyed.
you can find a way to ask more than make it some, because
Yeah.
like when you tell people to do stuff, it's
I
like,
know.
no. So, and
Really?
if you ask,
I had, like lately that's going on?
Yeah. Well, I think, Mr. Frank and I had this conversation at one point too, right, about people, I mean, it is in code right now that you're supposed to maintain the sidewalks in front of your home. And if this thing is happening and, you've got a tree trunk growing up underneath and it split your sidewalk in half, like, as the homeowner, you're supposed to take care of that.
I think Scott had a good, thought on that too,
Which one?
about, having the utility guys come over so we can preserve those bricks.
We're right as far as removing them.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, right, how can we provide a service to the citizen, and meet in the middle, if you will? So you get to keep your bricks as mentioned, and we have resources. You talked about the tree, and the sidewalks messed up
Yeah.
from the tree. So that brings in a sticky area, because then you got Nan, who's probably watching, if I threaten to cut down one of her trees, she'll be here
I
tomorrow.
know. I feel that. My aunt lived on Fort Street for a number of years, like right across from what was Ruth, and a beautiful tree was there forever and it got, cut down. I hate to see those grand trees being destroyed in our city too, but I also know that I walk a lot and, walking in town can be treacherous because a lot of our sidewalks are not maintained around in our community. And that's dangerous too, especially if you have somebody like walking at night and, all of a sudden the sidewalk was like this and now it's like,
Yeah, you'll
turned
see-
sideways.
You'll see here a week from Saturday when all the trick or treaters are out.
Yeah,
I remember those days, Madison on my shoulders and me almost
Dying.
yes,
well,
Corey would have laughed.
yeah, and I know that, Mr. Frank and I have talked about this before too. About like, if the city would do that and then charging a fee for it, but at the same time, it's not the city's, that isn't what the city's supposed to do. The homeowner is supposed to be maintaining their sidewalks in front of their property. And I don't know how you could do it in a way that, our guys are already stretched so thin, they don't have time to be going around like fixing every sidewalk.
Sure,
And-
but it's just removing them, you know.
If somebody wants to remove those bricks and to do something, then yeah, I think that's kind of like, we want to make sure that we're saving.
Yeah, the trade-off is we
bricks.
get to reserve those brick and keep those,
Yeah.
yeah.
If somebody said now that they got a brick sidewalk and you guys remove them, so we put a new one in, I wouldn't bet an eye, we would just go get them.
Yeah.
Take you, what, an hour, like you said, to dig that up?
Maybe, yeah, probably take more time loading the tractor. Yeah. But so since you're talking about that, before, I didn't have this information when you and I talked about, revamping them and possibly the city doing them for a fee and so forth. So the whole ADA compliance thing was the big learning curve for me down on Chestnut Street. So cookie cutter homes versus what we have is gonna create a significant problem, because anytime we touch the sidewalk, it has to go to ADA compliance. And I don't know all this stuff off the top of my head. I know it's so much degrees off and from side to side. But one of the things that we have here in the city that's not compliant is if you're walking on a sidewalk and then you hit a driveway, you know how it dips down into the
Yeah.
driveway and goes back up? You can't have that anymore. The sidewalk has to maintain level across there. So what that does is create a steep approach from the street over the sidewalk and into your driveway. So if you look on Chestnut Street, where we did the sewer last year, they only had about this much grass between the curb and the existing sidewalk. Well, when we put the sidewalk in there, because the only way the contractor would do it where it's sloped is if the city would take full responsibility if somebody was injured. I wasn't even willing to bring that to you guys, because who would do that? Anyway, so now the sidewalk's flat. People have very sharp approaches now because there wasn't much room to begin with. So we're gonna lose that on other driveways that have that dip down now. I can
You
take
mean
some
when they're
pic-
coming off the street, now it's like a,
straight up, well, not straight up, but it's very steep. Because the way they do it in cookie cutter neighborhoods and such is, if this is the sidewalk, they have a big green space. So they have all that room for the driveway to come up and over the sidewalk. Sidewalks don't dip anymore.
so, I mean, I guess, let me answer this, like, and where we did that on Chestnut Street, is this like an issue now where cars, like you scrape the bottom of your
Yes.
car, basically when you go up in your driveway?
Quite a few of them.
Okay.
Well, actually about 6.
Yeah, I could see the annoyance in
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, and I know that also, because I know that we had a project at OU where we had to do some sidewalk work, and for the ADA, like, they have to be so wide. Also, which a lot of ours in the city aren't super wide sidewalks. But they're supposed to be wide enough now, I think, for like a standard wheelchair or motorized, wheelchair to get through and that type of thing.
Well, they're not even that, I mean, if you wanted to redo
Literally.
them, they're not that
Yeah, you
wide.
have no room,
Right.
right? So I'm sure that those things have to technically be grandfathered,
I'm not
And-
sure.
but I think that's something that maybe we'll have to ask the law director for an opinion on. for that. Okay,
Yeah, that was definitely the biggest lesson learned down there, because people were really upset, and I understand, I'd be upset as well, but what do you do? So,
well, and I understand that, like, when they did this, so they did, as part of that neighborhood grant, they redid the sidewalks, like, down on Chestnut, like, by where my house is. So, the kind of the other end of Chestnut, and they did redo the portion that went over my driveway.
I'm curious how it looks, because there's 2 different contractors. And since you said that, I was thinking to myself, I wonder what they did on the other one, because they did that before Chestnut Street did it, and I checked their work, but I didn't pay attention to that detail until the other ones refused it. So I'm curious how it does look on your side, if they maintain the same thing, or if they did.
I would say there's very few driveways, that come to the street on my side. You have to remember, the houses across from me have alley
Oh, yeah.
access. I have a cut driveway into my property. But the whole rest of my block, I think I'm the only cut-in driveway. No, there's one more, on my block. So on our whole block, there's only 2 driveways that come up. The other ones, then have access, they access from Canal Street. And on the opposite side of Chestnut, they're accessing from the alley between like Chestnut and Poplar. So,
But they also have, where she's at, they also have more room from the sidewalk to the
Yes,
street versus
yes.
the far end.
we
Literally,
have
They
bigger,
don't have much of
we
a.
have bigger, I know, when I looked at like, we always call them tree lawns, we have like bigger tree lawn
Yeah.
area. There
Probably
too,
about
that on
3 or
that
4
lower
feet.
end of Chestnut where they have very narrow,
Mhm.
from the street to the front of the houses.
Sure.
It's very, very narrow down there. So, okay. All right, well,
And then the other thing too for the homeowners is with crosswalks, it's very specific. So the folks at the Hive asked us about putting a crosswalk in front of the Hive, the new Hive. And, it's not impossible, but it's expensive. I believe we're at $5,000 to do those 2 cut-ins and have all the proper stuff put into them. So, just for those folks who do have transition to a crosswalk, those little pads that are, you know,
With
the
the
bumps
bubbles.
and everything, it gets expensive quick, because again, they have to be certain width, slope and everything else, so. There's a whole lot in the sidewalk you never would have thought about.
yeah,
I know I,
no, I think it's true. I think it's, yeah. It also goes to like, back to the whole building code and having somebody that's doing that.
I think the rest of that sidewalk up that way though, wasn't that to be in the third part of the, what was that, $1.7 million beautification of uptown? And there was like 3 parts and they were 3 years apart. You could get the grant.
no, so I was referring to the one attached to the sewer project. And I know she was talking about the neighborhood grant. I think you're referring
I
to the
was
one that
just
was
talking,
uptown.
the one uptown by the, when you was talking about by the Hive, because the third step of that, I think, was supposed to bring the sidewalks all up that way.
Could be, I
But you could
haven't,
only apply like every 3 years, so it was gonna be a while.
right, we should be coming around. Actually, you told me to look into it and I did. That's why I think we're coming around next year, but I don't, because we missed a year in there somewhere. Because
Yeah.
wasn't it 17 you guys did that? I know we just got an $8,000 bill from them that wasn't paid back then, but, could be here or there. So,
But I mean, maybe some of that could all be paid for if you apply when the time comes.
sure.
Yeah, I know that the work that they did on part of Chestnut, where they put in the crosswalk, then at Canal and Steiger. And that's all really nice. The work that they did there.
So what's our
Okay,
next step?
so
then
our
when
next
the
step
time
is
comes?
to, I guess we need to have some conversations with Chief Barber and with Becky, about this, and I maybe, again, go back and, I'm gonna go back and try to look for minutes and figure out what happened to our, building code discussion, like how that ended, and we didn't finish that. And then with the sidewalks, ask the law director for an opinion on if a homeowner does replacement, does it have to be
Right.
ADA compliant, or is the homeowner not? And I would think the homeowner wouldn't be responsible for that if it's a private person, but like if the city does it, I understand that like we would probably, as a city, have to make sure things are ADA compliant. But if I do it as a homeowner, maybe not. But I guess we need an opinion on that because it is still a sidewalk.
Well, and it's one of those gray areas. I'm just being devil's advocate. I could see if something happened. Well, municipality, you should have been monitoring this anyways, even though they pay to do it. You should have permit, check it and
Yeah,
all that, which that would go full circle.
right. We don't have any kind of permitting process. Yeah, we're back where we were.
Liability is the main.
So great
Seems to
conversation.
happen a lot, though.
Great conversation, absolutely no decisions made.
Yeah. So we'll be back in 2 weeks then.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that was awesome. Okay. So that would be November 1st.
We're having a meeting on the first, if you know that.
Okay. You're having
Wasn't it the first or was it the second? No, it was the first, Monday.
Monday, the 1st? Okay. Do you want to take 6 again? On the 1st? Okay. All right, hopefully we'll have some answers then. All right, then we're going to adjourn this meeting at 6:52 PM. Thank you.